Welcome, I'm Maureen Connolly, the editor-in-chief of EverydayHealth.com and the host of Boxed In, a new series from Everyday Health featuring conversations with the country's top mental health experts, focusing on the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on our mental health and well-being. Our featured guest today is Dr. David Rosmarin. He's founder-director of the Center for Anxiety in New York and an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. His research and clinical work have been featured on NPR, Scientific American, The Wall Street Journal, and The New York Times. A little later in this conversation, we'll also hear from Mike Vini. He's an author and a public speaker who lives in New York. And for years, Mike has struggled with anxiety, but these days he's finding his mood swings from anger to sadness, and his normal outlet, his boxing gym, is not available, which is presenting many challenges to Mike. But first, Dr. Rosmarin, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I think it's important to start off this conversation acknowledging the fact that as we face this global pandemic and live each day with the threat of contracting a deadly virus, and of course there are thousands losing loved ones to COVID and millions more facing financial disaster because of job loss. To say that we're experiencing anxiety at record highs is, of course, seems a lot like stating the obvious. But we're here to discussing this today so we can learn how to better manage this anxiety so that it doesn't take over, steal our vitality and I guess our ability to engage in life. So can you help us understand, why do we get anxious in the first place, especially in a time like this?
In general or now? That was going to be my question.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, unprecedented, right? So it's kind of like, okay, we probably could figure out why our typical former lives used to cause this anxiety, but what about now just is off the charts?
100%. And they are, of course, related. The clinical science tells us that the reason why people get anxious is because if we can't tolerate not knowing what's going to happen next and not being able to predict and control the future, when people can't handle that, that's what ultimately creates a sense of anxiety. And today, we can't. It's very clear. We can't control anything. Our levels of uncertainty are higher than they've ever been in recent history. And most of us don't have training in how to tolerate that and how to handle that enormous amount of uncertainty that we're all facing. So that's, I think, the main reason why we're suffering so much today.
And so for someone who's never had anxiety before, how does that show up? Like, what starts to happen? Are people ruminating more? Are they sleepless nights?
Sure. Yeah. Cognitive, behavioral, and physiological are the three sort of aspects. Cognitively, like you mentioned, ruminating or worrying, which is about the future. Ruminating is usually about the past. And people are thinking a lot more about what's going on, what's going to be. Is my Amazon Fresh delivery going to come? Am I going to be able to get a slot? Am I going to be able to, or even more serious, pay my bills? Is this going to sweep throughout my community? Is it going to affect me? Is it going to affect my loved ones? And all of those cognitive aspects, those thoughts, are often taking over people. Behaviorally, like you mentioned, delayed sleep onset, having difficulty getting to bed. Maybe people are finding themselves checking the internet more, doing a lot more checking of information, even though it doesn't really help them. People often also withdraw or avoid certain things. So they might be not speaking to certain people as much because they're feeling overwhelmed, as opposed to pursuing that. And then physiologically, all those symptoms that people have, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, right? Which is not necessarily COVID, right? That's often anxiety, heart palpitations. Those are the kinds of ways that it manifests.
So if we were to kind of break it down a bit, taking away the sense of routine, right? You talked about the fact that like life is very different right now. We know we're not getting up and going to an office anymore, hopping in our cars and just, let me breeze into the supermarket, right? It's like
Right.
My mask on and I've got to wait in line for 25 minutes. And so it feels like everything is so much harder. But when you take away routine from someone and that's not replaced with anything, I guess, what do we do about that? How can we should you try and manufacture some type of routine?
So yes, there are degrees to which we can manufacture routine. You know, the number one predictor behaviorally of people's anxiety today is having a bedtime. I'm doing some research with some folks at Columbia, and these results that of our initial study, it's 300 individuals who were amongst the first to be in quarantine. We found that the top predictor, even more than having a pre-existing health condition, or even more than being exposed to COVID, was actually whether they had quality sleep, which was predicted by having a bedtime. If people have a bedtime, that in of itself, that one tip can alleviate a lot of anxiety. Not all of it, but that can account for potentially 40% of a person's anxiety, according to our data.
So wait, so help me understand this. So when you're saying you have like a regular set bedtime, like you're going to go to bed at 10:40 and have a routine leading up to that, what is it about the actual bedtime itself? Sticking to
Yeah. So how do you stick to a bedtime? I mean, what I would tell my patients is, uh, or myself, my family, and what I would do, what I'm trying to do is I have a bedtime of, for me, it's 11 o'clock. And I'm trying to stick within a half an hour of that. So I'm going to bed between 10:30 and 11:30. I'm also shutting off my devices, trying to, at least half an hour before that bedtime. So in terms of the routine, you know, pajamas, brushing your teeth, you know, getting, you know, which means getting dressed, by the way, in the morning, that's another story. But having some sort of a routine where we're dimming the lights, getting away from the computer, at least a half an hour for bedtime, and then trying to hit that 1 hour block, half an hour before, half an hour after our specific bedtime.
So is it the kind of regulating your brain or your sleep schedule that keeps the anxiety away, or is it, are you talking about quality sleep? I'm just trying to understand what the connection is between anxiety and less anxiety, I guess, if you have a regular bedtime.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a couple of things. From a physiological standpoint, you have circadian rhythms, which are getting regulated. You're also, from a behavioral standpoint, if you have a regular bedtime, you're probably going to have a regular wake time, which means you're getting out of bed, and then there's some consistency, which gives us that predictability. But perhaps the most interesting for me as a psychologist is the psychological aspect of it, which is when we go to bed, we're saying, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to control this. And I'm going to put whatever perception of control I have on hold for the next, whatever it is, 7, 8, 9 hours, however much you need. I'm out. I'm on break. And that's so critical for us today, to let go and to realize we are not in control. We are not able to predict, and we have to become at peace with that. So the one act of at least doing it for a third of our day has, I believe, I don't know the mechanisms, that goes beyond the data I have, but I would bet, I'd love to test it, that's a key mechanism, is can we actually just let it go for at least part of the day?
Yeah, and so I guess other modalities, you talked about exposure therapy. I thought maybe you could explain what that is and how that might help people.
Yeah, exposure therapy is interesting. We use it, you know, typically when people, you know, outside of a crisis, when people have an anxiety concern. Again, that which creates anxiety is a sense that I need to be in control, not being able to tolerate a lack of control and a lack of certainty. So what exposure therapy does is helps a person to face their fear over and over again until they become okay with not being in control. A simple example is like a snake or a spider. We have people in my office who have very severe spider snake phobias. And we actually have a guy who'll come in with, you know, a box of tarantulas. And I know. And they learn that the spider does unpredictable things. It will go north, south, east, and west. It'll go up and down. It will, you know, do all sorts of things. But it's not really dangerous, and we just have to learn to be okay with that. Same with the snake. Same with driving. Or same with our worries, or panic, or even obsessive compulsive disorder. It's the same idea, although those are more complex, obviously.
So for people who are, you know, their fears are valid right now, right? Like worrying
Correct.
about getting a virus that may kill them or someone they love. So what would you recommend to one of your patients? I mean, should you journal about this? Should you, I know meditation and breathing, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but are there like, what would you say to them?
Right. So from an exposures therapist perspective, I'm not saying to go outside and kiss the first person who walks by your door. Obviously, don't put yourself in danger. But I think we need to get up here in our minds and here in our hearts to a place of acceptance that ultimately there's only so much we can control. I'm going to
Right.
do my best, right? I've got a mask when I walk out. I'm, avoiding going out. I'm not, socializing, I'm hanging out with my family inside. Kids aren't going out. But at the end of the day, it might be beyond me. And can I get to a place of acceptance in my mind and my heart about that? That's worth contemplation.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess journaling is not a bad idea, right? To kind of get those thoughts out of your head or worries, just leave them somewhere.
100%. If the journaling is focused on this is what could happen to me and it's hard for me and I'm trying to get to a place of acceptance about that, that would be fabulous. Great.
Okay, so yeah, and we talk a lot at Everyday Health about the power of meditation and using the breath to reduce feelings of anxiety and stress. And it's one of those things where I feel like people hear it so often. They're like, "Yes, I know, I'm supposed to meditate," or breathing is important. But I just think it's important to hear from people like yourself who know, explain to us what happens to the brain when we meditate and why it's so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, when the frontal cortex is very active in day-to-day life when you're thinking, especially when a person's worrying or, as you mentioned before, ruminating, when your mind is going, all of that is right here. You have lots of energy here, and to learn to quell that down through just focusing on the moment and letting go of those thoughts, that's hugely helpful in the moment, and then it has subsequent effects on people on reducing that neural activity. I think again, though, the mechanism though is I'm not going to try to control during my 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute meditation. I'm actually letting go, and I'm not going to try to change. I'm not going to pick up my email. I'm not going to even think or plan about the future. I'm just going to be for these couple of minutes. And that seems to be the mechanism. Can we just be and not have to change everything? That's the place we need to get to.
And so what's the kind of power between setting up as a regular practice? So really kind of saying through this time, I am going to commit to doing 5 to 10 minutes a day, and why the regularity is so important, or effective, I should say.
Yeah, 100%. 5 to 10 minutes a day sounds great. 10 might be on the high side for some people. Even sometimes I've recommended 2 minutes or 3 minutes if people are very anxious about it. One way to do it is just to focus on one's breath, just to breathe in and feel the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. And if thoughts come in while we're doing that, just to let them go, not pushing them out, not being, rough with them, just letting them go and coming back to the focus of one's breath. The world would be a much calmer place if we all just did that for a couple minutes.
And is that something that works there's a difference between feeling like, wow, I'm so anxious, I can't believe what's happening in the world. So you're sort of in this space. And then there are times, and I've personally experienced this myself, where my head truly feels like, oh my gosh, if I don't do something right now, I want to go for a run for 3 miles, but I can't do that. Or what can you do in the moment when it's feeling like this is pretty critical right now and I want to get rid of this intense feeling of anxiety?
Right. Sometimes I think about the current crisis as being, we're in the middle of an exam and a lot of people are not prepared. So I think all of that prep work that we can do in advance of learning to let go. An interesting finding that I'm seeing in my own practice in our clinic in New York, which I haven't seen any data on, but I wonder whether this is going to be a trend. Some of the patients who have anxiety and have had it for a long time are actually faring quite well right now because they've been prepared. They've been preparing to let go, and they've been facing high levels of anxiety. They also often feel a lot more understood because everyone's anxiety is high. So there's no shame or stigma anymore with, having high levels of stress. So to your question of what can you do in the moment, sometimes not a whole lot, except to just breathe, try to let go. Don't fight it. Definitely don't fight your anxiety. That will make it worse. Just let it ride out. Don't fight it. Let it happen. And then that's an indicator that we probably need to prepare more for the future.
And other symptoms that show up because we're in a chronic state of anxiety, would you agree that like inability to focus, a lot of people have been saying, gosh, I'm trying to focus on my work or try to read a book and it's near impossible. Or they're, obviously they're having less patience, much less patience with their kids or their spouse. So I guess, I don't know if there's any way around that, but is there something, again, is that connected and what does one do?
Yeah, there's two things going on there. One is it might be caused by anxiety, as you said, which is a common pathway to those sorts of intrapersonal or interpersonal sequelae or consequences. But another thing is just the stress level is high. People are trying to do homeschooling. They're trying to get along with people. They're working less or working more, or trying to keep up, or we have crazy hours. It's so stressful. And that's a little different from anxiety. We got to cut ourselves a lot of slack today. I mean, it's not the time to start major projects. Try to keep things as normal as possible is fine, but we need to cut things down. It's not the time to be ambitious.
Yeah, I've seen people, saying, oh, I'm going to learn how to play guitar or learn a new language, right? Start that.
For fun, if you want to experiment, you want to like sit there playing with a ukulele or like learning a couple words in Spanish for fun, fine, but like to take it seriously, I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're putting way too much pressure on ourselves. Although I guess there's something to be said though for things that distract us that are positive, right? So when I cook, and normally I'm commuting back and forth to New York, and so I get home fairly late in the evenings, but now I'm home all the time working from home. And so just to kind of get out of my head, the cooking is one way that I can do that. Same with when I go for a run or a walk. So I guess people looking to just cultivate some other fun things, outlets.
Yeah, that's totally fine. But I hope you're not, learning how to, cook up creme brulee if you don't know how to do it already.
No, I'm not going to take that on. Definitely not.
Right.
Well, now might be a good time to have Mike join us. And I'd love to give Mike the opportunity to kind of talk about his story. Mike, are you there?
Hi.
Hey. All right. So here we are. Thank you for joining us. And, being so willing to talk about your story. I know suffering with anxiety is just no picnic. I've been there myself over the years at various points dealing with depression and anxiety. And so I just kind of share with us what it's like and being cut off. And I want to hear about your whole boxing thing too. I think that's.
Well, I have been, I'm 41 years old and I have been living with anxiety for most of my life, as far as I know. And it's manifested in different ways. In fact, I'm learning that a lot of times what I thought was anger was actually anxiety. And for me, it's in my body. I feel it. I feel it in my chest. It clenches up. It makes it hard to move. There have been times where I couldn't get out of bed. And, I'm in shape, exercise all the time. I meditate too. But it just makes it difficult to do things. And it also makes my thinking clouded in a sense because my mind is racing with worry. And it gets to the point where, we all tell stories to ourselves, but you really start telling some real off the wall stories to yourself. So you have that going all at once and it makes it just difficult to live.
Yeah. So before COVID, right, this is a challenge that you had. And in your typical life, what were the things that were causing you anxiety then? And then we'll talk about COVID.
Oh, that's a great question. I still think we're still working out in therapy the things that have caused me anxiety. It's a process, not a destination, and that's something I want to say to people out there that a lot of times we just want the anxiety to go away. We wish like, can you give me a tip to make it go away? It's a process. It's something you're always working on, and actually, in my mind, that's the beautiful thing about it. I am hardcore about my self-care. Actually, 1 year ago to the day, I learned transcendental meditation in New York City, where I meditate for 20 minutes twice a day. That has helped me a lot, but still sometimes it can just come out of nowhere and feel really out of control. It's made it more manageable. I exercise, and because my anger issues, I used to have the boxing gym, but that's put on hold for now.
Yeah. So, gosh, 20 minutes twice a day. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so like, I guess doing that, you come out of it, and do you find that the feeling kind of carries through the day a little bit when you've been able to spend 20 minutes? It's like normally you would have been, I don't know, anxious about X, and now it's like, no, I did my meditation. It's kind of working for me.
I would love to tell you that. It makes it more manageable. It makes it just sometimes even just a little bit more manageable, which is more than enough to get you through the day. But there have been times where I have meditated, I feel all zen when I'm done, and then within 30 minutes, something just hits me and I'm back in a bad place. And for me, I start really spiraling down. And as a kid, it led to me being hospitalized in the mental hospital. So for me, it's a very acute thing that I have to manage every day.
Yeah. And so during this time, and again, I don't want to stir up anxiety for you by asking questions, so you can tell me if it's not something you feel comfortable asking, but like, just so people out there, who already are diagnosed clinically with anxiety and depression, right, will relate, but also people who are new and going, oh my gosh, I've never, been anxious in my life. And now this is a total game changer with, worrying about COVID. Is it a ruminating thing? You sort of think, oh my gosh, what if I got COVID, or what if I lose my job? Like, what for you are the triggers?
It's anything and everything. I mean, I feel like, they say like managing this is a day by thing. It's day by day thing. This is an hour by hour or sometimes minute by minute thing. And, one moment I'm fine. I feel centered. The next moment I'm worried about the future. And, the worry is centered in something real. Like this is not a made up thing that's in someone's mind. This is really happening right now. And so it's really important, that I really keep on top of my, anxiety management. That being said, one thing that has really helped me that might help some people out there, and it was said before by the doctor, was that just learning to sit in your body. Because a lot of times we approach anxiety from the idea of the mind and just calming it down, but anxiety is also in our body. And I know for me that there's a style of yoga that I do called yin yoga, and I call it the lazy person's yoga because you just get to sit on the floor. I'm not a yoga person, by the way, and so you sit on the floor, there's videos online, you hold poses for 5 minutes. And if you've ever been in a yin yoga class, I've been to many in New York City, people start randomly shaking and crying and letting out emotions because we store emotions in our body. And there's a great book, a great read on this called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which talks about anxiety and PTSD. And again, we can talk about our thoughts and our past and all that, but just learning to feel where is it in my body. And so throughout the day, I'm constantly doing that.
Wow. That is actually an amazing piece of advice.
Thank
really,
you.
really. Okay, so Dr. Rosmarin, there. Okay, so Dr. Rosmarin, I'd love to know your thoughts about what Mike just shared in terms of what's working for him.
Well, first and foremost, I'll tell Mike what I tell all my patients, which is that I learn a lot more from speaking with you than I did in all my years of education and training and everything else I ever did. And it's also really inspiring. Anxiety is the kind of thing that everybody has to face at some point. Some individuals have more, some have less, and it's just amazing. Yes, the body definitely keeps a score, and there are different ways to get to a place of acceptance. One is through cognitive means that I was speaking about before, behavioral means like sleep, letting go, and you're speaking more about the physiological, direct ways of through yoga, through paced breathing, through letting our body not have a need to hold on, to teach it to literally let go. And it's just fabulous hearing you talk about how you do that.
Thank you.
Mike, I'm curious to know, have you gotten rid of certain things maybe in your diet or habits or anything in your lifestyle that you would say, you know what, once I did this, things get a little bit better? Or
I'm on that coronavirus diet just like everybody else at home. And, I want to say this: there has never been one thing for me, and I don't think for anyone that I know who struggles with mental health challenges, it's one thing. I think for all of us, I like to call it a cocktail of different things that work. For me, one thing that's really helped me though is water, and I think sometimes when I'm anxious, I forget to drink water, and sometimes I mistake dehydration for anxiety and depression. And so it's really important to just make sure you do that because you could be thinking you're anxious and you're not sometimes.
Yeah, we've written about that at Everyday Health, actually, the connection between dehydration and it can kind of feel like it's anxiety. It's like, no, try getting some water and see if you feel better, right?
Yeah.
So great tip. And did you have a question that you wanted to ask Dr. Rosmarin?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, thank you all for this. And Dr. Rosmarin, thank you for being here. And actually, the room I'm in, I got permission from my building to be in this private room because I just really just had to have a real talk with you here. There's a lot of people out there, myself included, struggling with anger. And, to be really transparent, Sunday night I had a bit of a meltdown. I just went for a walk and it was overwhelming. And I know how to manage my anger. It doesn't really get me in trouble. It's more of an imploding. But you've got a rise in domestic violence right now. It's a real problem. Anger is a real problem. What do you suggest that we do right now during this time to handle our anger?
It's a really great question. There definitely is indication that domestic violence is increasing, as is the divorce rate. I don't know if you saw it online, but I think they even had to close the divorce office in China because they were getting so many applications. And I'm definitely concerned about what's going to happen in the wake of our sort of heightened stress and anxiety. When it comes to relationships, the number one thing we can do with our loved ones is to tell them that we're suffering and that we need them. It's not a time to be bold and say, hey, like, I'm just going to do my thing and you're going to do your thing. And that's often what precipitates anger. It's time to be vulnerable and to say, hey, babe, I'm really struggling right now. I'm at my wit's end. I'm trying to pull everything together and I just need a hug. I need someone to comfort me and to help me. And we all need that. Maybe that's what this whole coronavirus thing is about. People are often working so hard and we're so focused on productivity as opposed to connection. And now everyone's stuck in their houses with, in their homes with the people who they hopefully, not being alone with the people they love the most. And can we show them that we actually need them? That takes down the anger quotient by, huge amounts when we just do that one thing.
Can I ask something else about that? And again, I just want to challenge you here because of my own situation and others that are out there. I'm actually very vocal about my anger with everyone. I'm even a public figure. I'm a blogger. I talk about it on YouTube, and I'm okay sharing my feelings. I'm okay crying, but still some of us get to this point where it's just beyond overwhelming, and even talking to someone is not going to help. It's just like over the top. When someone's in that state without having to go to the mental hospital, what do you suggest?
Yeah, that's definitely a time to go for a walk. I mean, if we're beyond the point, firstly, it's a matter of prep. That's sort of the preparing for the test example that I said beforehand. Like if a person's at the point of anger that they literally can't stop it, even by showing their, vulnerability to others, probably they need to pregame it a little bit. And I would recommend having those conversations well in advance. But if you haven't, for whatever reason, just because it's busy or, no judgment, or if we haven't practiced doing that and we're at that state, we got to withdraw from the situation. That's a time to just go for a walk, just take a 10-minute walk, just cool off. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no judgment. If we're getting all intense at some point, just take a breath, take a couple minutes, come back and say, hey, I'm really struggling, and try it again.
Yeah, I think at a much lesser level, Mike, my situation, I have 3 kids and I work in this job and there are long days. And the other evening I was, feeling, I haven't been with them all day. I should really be that mom who can sit down and do the dinner and have that nice discussion. And I walked in and I was like, I got nothing left. Like my level for any, I don't know, I just had nothing left to give. And because I, do so many of these interviews, I've been able to learn a few things along the way. And it was this idea of self-care, kind of like in that moment, just figuring out what is it that's going to serve you best right now, right? And for me, I was like, all I wanted to go do is go up to my bedroom and be alone, just veg out on, read a magazine or scroll through Instagram, but something that I could just check out. Because if I hadn't done that, I know inevitably my tolerance level and that kind of snippy and kind of losing patience for whatever, whether it's a sink full of dirty dishes or things that I walk into and I try and like, okay, don't let it set you off. But those little things, kind of like you were saying, it's not one thing, but it's like tweaking along the way and making a choice that serves you ultimately, right? And so you can be your best self. And again, I'm not an expert, but that's one thing that's been hugely helpful to me. It feels like I'm being selfish, but actually it's self-care. So I don't know if that resonates with you, Doctor.
Yeah, no, for sure. We have to take care of ourselves. If we don't fill our tanks and, run out of gas, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, and I think under these circumstances where, we are, some of us isolating or alone, right? And others living with other people 24/7, that we may love them, but to have to do this, day in and day out, it has its own set of challenges. And so kind of navigating your anxiety levels in those situations, I guess it is a lot about communication and figuring out like, hey, this is what I need right now, and please respect that. Or what do you need, right? So maybe you're witnessing anxiety in somebody else, right? So how can you help a loved one navigate a time that might be incredibly difficult for him or her?
Right. They might not be used to opening up about how they feel. So, having that frank conversation in a loving, supportive way, it's a huge gift to them and to us.
Yeah. So I guess we could, one more question, Mike. I don't know if or one more thing you want to like weigh in on before we wrap up.
I think the one issue that I know I've experienced, and many others, and it kind of goes with what Maureen was just saying. We still have to work, many of us, and be productive, be at our best, and hope we don't lose work and all that stuff. Is there anything that you suggest that we keep in mind so we can be as productive as we can be during this time? Maybe even things we need to do while working.
I think it's probably a time to take down the pressure, not to ratchet it up. So as I mentioned before, it's not the time to start an ambitious new work project. I think we need to have very frank conversations with our employers if we're employed, or with our employees if we employ others, that this is what I can do, this is what I'm capable of doing right now, and this is what's sort of beyond my ability, because I'm, managing things at home, things are tense. I'm not even sure when my groceries are coming. I'm, having difficulty sleeping. I mean, I don't know how much to disclose in terms of your relationship with your employer. That's a very much individualized decision. But I think it's time, again, that we show that we're not always in control. We're not always in a predictable state of mind. And that's okay. We're just human beings. Right now, here I am in my house. I've got a bunch of kids downstairs. I don't know whether one of them is going to barge in the middle of this interview. That could very well happen. I don't think so. I asked them not to. I said, please. But they're doing homeschool. Who knows? And I don't know, I just have no predictability. And can we be okay with that? And can we communicate that to others and show that there's just limits. We're human beings.
Yeah. I mean, I think just, to end maybe on a positive note, one of the things I have to say that I've sort of kind of like about what's happened is the walls are kind of dropping down a bit. I feel like when I'm on these calls right now, and even my work calls, people are just, they seem more vulnerable, more real, more honest. And I think there's this sense of connection that for me fuels it just makes me so happy, because there's so many formalities in the way we do things in life. And, some of that serves a purpose, but I just think I don't know, it just feels like, hey, look at us, the three of us are here and we're having a great conversation in the middle of the day, talking about real stuff, and being honest about it. So yeah, that feels good. And hopefully we'll remember how to do this, after the fact.
Yeah, shouldn't let the good crisis go to waste, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And for everybody who's watching, if you want more information, you can go to everydayhealth.com. great tips on navigating your health and well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic, go to everydayhealth.com/Tippy.